Welcome to our conversation today, following on from International Women's Day and sitting within Harmony Week. Today we are having a conversation with Katrina Stratton, who is our local member. She's an ALP member of the WA Legislative Assembly for the seat of Nedlands. Katrina has a doctorate in social work and prior to being an MP, lectured at Curtin University and UWA for over 20 years. She has previously been a board member of Tuart Place, a resource service for adults who were in out-of-home care during their childhood. And previously, she was also manager, research and evaluation at Wansley, and she'll no doubt tell us a little bit more about what Wansley is. And she led a multidisciplinary research project looking at the impact of the caring role of grandparents who are raising their grandchildren at home, plus a couple of other major projects. Research, Katrina says, is her passion, which is great for us. And while her area has been in social research, she says grant success rates in her area are not very different from NHMRC success rates, so she knows your pain. The conversation today follows on from last week's International Women's Day, which occurs each year on the 8th of March. And this year it carried the theme, Break the Bias. And it's also being recorded during Harmony Week, which celebrates Australia's cultural diversity. So welcome, Katrina, and thank you very much for giving your time to the Perkins.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
As a politician working in this electorate, there are probably a number of assumptions in the wider community that people in the seat of Nedlands don't experience biases that limit their pathways to achievement. But what would you say you've seen since you've been the local member?
Yeah, and looking like any good researcher, I know better than to sit with assumptions. And one of the things we actually did in running the campaign was to look at the census data from the previous 3 lots of census to see actually how the demographics of the seat of Nedlands had changed over the years. I mean, in terms of, I guess, its socioeconomic profile, I think people often associate the seat of Nedlands with a particular parade in Dalkeith. But in actual fact, we are home to the oldest multi-storey social housing complex in Western Australia, sitting in Subiaco. Yes, obviously right through to, to suburbs that sit inside what we all know as the Golden Triangle. So there's actually quite a lot of socioeconomic diversity in this electorate, which is way beyond, I think, some of the assumptions that people make about this community. One of the shifts that we really noticed through the census data, though, was that the seat of Nedlands was becoming younger in the sense that a lot of young families move to this community, particularly to access public education. So particularly for their kids to be able to go to Shenton College and now, of course, Bob Hawke College as well. And that a lot of people were taking out really heavy mortgages to be able to give their children access to that education. So making a lot of sacrifices for their children to have that experience and to be able to live in this community as well.
Yeah, I mean, all communities have a diverse range of people. I certainly know when I sat on the board of Lottery West, the grant applications came in and the team would always do that socioeconomic, race, gender, diverse age mix, and it never ceased to surprise me how varied every single community is. From your research background, do you have some insights that as to why it is that what are the things that hold communities and people back from embracing diversity, inclusivity, and moving away from assumptions?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the research that we did at Wansley was around better understanding people's experiences of particular circumstances. So we would quite often use our research as an awareness raising and an education platform. And we would take that education to politicians, to other community organisations, other service providers, funding bodies and the like, so that awareness and education could then translate into action. So one of the main projects that I was involved in, and actually for me one of the key drivers to enter political life, was a piece of work we did with grandparents who are raising their grandchildren on a full-time basis. So grandparent care is the fastest growing form of out-of-home care for vulnerable children in Australia, but it's also one of the most hidden forms of care as well, because a lot of grandparent carers take on the care of their grandchildren through a family arrangement. So there's not a lot of data recorded about how many grandparent carer families they actually are, because they don't show up in any kind of official government statistics. And of course, and reflecting on International Women's Day, through our research, we profiled grandparent carers as being primarily single women over the age of 65, raising on average 2.3 grandchildren, so which is larger than the average Australian family of 1.9 children. Many of them were already living in poverty, and the care role only exacerbated their poverty. So for me, the gendered issues in that are that care is a feminised role. It's something that is assumed to be natural, and therefore is unrecognised, unsupported, unresourced. Of course, I think the fact that it tends to be older women who are grandparent carers adds another layer of that to that lack of recognition, and in actual fact, the invisibility of the grandparent carer role. And so I see a major role for research, whether it be social research, medical research, other categories of research, is all about shining a light on, hidden populations, hidden experiences, hidden and unexplored disease and health situations as well, and shining a light on those and bringing them to the attention of the people that can take action to respond to those invisibilities and make them visible.
That piece of research on grandparent carers, it was, I think, one of 3 major research projects that you were involved in, ensuring that they were coordinated. Could you also just touch a little bit on what the other 2 were?
Yeah, so we were also involved in a project called Navigating Through Life, which was talking to young people who had left out-of-home care and asking them to look back on the planning that occurred for them in terms of transitioning out of care and into adulthood, which, in terms of leaving care is just defined as turning 18. And so asking them to reflect on what would have provided them with a better leaving care experience that would have set them up for, all the responsibilities and rights of being an adult. And that was a joint project between Curtin University and numerous out-of-home care providers, as well as the Department of Communities as the state government. And the other project that we were involved in, and is an ongoing project, was the 100 Families WA project. And the 100 Families WA project explored people's pathways in and out of entrenched disadvantage in Western Australia. So experiences of poverty and homelessness. And again, that was a very collaborative project. It was led by WACOS, but partnered with UWA as the lead, research institution, but partnered with 9 other community service organisations based throughout Western Australia. Now, of course, one of the things we discovered through that was, that for women, their experiences of poverty are often exacerbated by their unpaid care roles. So, there's poverty for them in terms of, making scarce resources spread amongst a family, but also limiting their access to employment and to education as well. And often those things were very, very tied together. There were no opportunities to kind of, to break away from that. And that often those journeys would come with a lot of risk and sacrifice as well. And so that 100 Families WA project is now in the implementation stage and looking at, how we can make improvements in policy and in service delivery to ensure that people's pathways out of entrenched disadvantage are made easier.
Those multiple layers of burden, which really do impact people's capacity to thrive.
Yeah.
And doing this level of research, in addition to influencing policy or legislation and bringing about structural change in community, what capacity was there to deliver advocacy visibility, promote awareness of these layers of burden which limit people?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. I'll talk about two of them in particular. So in all of those projects, we were really concerned to make sure that the voice of lived experience was very, very present, so that we as researchers weren't relaying people's experiences of poverty and of being a grandparent carer, but that people took ownership of their own stories and told their own stories. And very often what that would provide would be, the heart connection. That this isn't, we're not just talking about a collection of aggregated experiences or numbers, but we're talking about people's real lived day-to-day experiences. So all of those projects had a community advisory group that guided all parts of the research process, from proposal through to ethics, approval through to funding, data collection tools, data analysis, and then finally implementation and calls to action. The other thing that so a colleague and I, the research lead at Anglicare WA, we recognise that one of the challenges, well, there are a number of challenges for social research in Western Australia. And as you said in your introduction, one of those was recognising that getting West Australian social research recognised on the national stage was very, very challenging. That our success rates in ARC funding were not dissimilar to what West Australia experiences in NHMRC funding, very, very East Coast centric. And social research, as a social worker, we're a very female dominated profession. So a lot of our researchers are also women. Our research track records look a little different. There's lots of breaks for care responsibilities, as well as I think a lot of, kind of unrecognised bias and assumptions that, that we face as well. So for example, in another project that I was involved in around family and domestic violence, at Curtin University, we have a female researcher who is an international expert in the gendered experience of family and domestic violence, but, virtually unrecognised in terms of kind of funding success, and always having to collaborate with East Coast universities to be able to, really, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of solidify her funding applications. It's a challenge, a woman doing research on a gendered experience. I think there's kind of multiple layers of bias that exist there. But sorry, I digress, because so one of the things my Anglicare colleague and I did was we set up the West Australian Social Research Network. And we had a couple of purposes in that, and one was to build the profile of West Australian social research on a national stage, because we had a number of really innovative collaborative projects that were happening, but also to make sure in terms of advocacy that we were speaking with a coordinated collaborative voice. So we wanted to avoid things like, the Grandparent Carer Project team going and speaking to the Minister for Communities on a Tuesday, and then the 100 Families Project going and speaking to her on a Wednesday, and her saying, well, hang on, I'm hearing some crossover, of issues here. Why aren't you speaking to each other? So we didn't necessarily want to be interfering with one another's messages, but making sure that we were making a coordinated approach, because a lot of those experiences of disadvantage intersect as well. So wanting to make sure that we were giving the best voice to the people that we were researching with as well.
Yeah, good strategic advice for stakeholder management there. Tell us less perhaps from the detail of these projects, but how can each of us do better, do you think, to make a difference for others, create a more equitable community, a more inclusive community? My mind was instantly going to all the different levels of, HR, workplace, things you can impose structurally, but individually, what can each of us do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when we did the grandparent carer research, we did a set of recommendations for state government, federal government service providers, and the community. So what could people as community members do? And I think, it comes down to a lot of that, we talked about unpacking bias and assumptions. of really listening to people, of understanding that everybody has a story, and the story isn't told by their appearance or the car they drive. The story is told when we ask questions and we dare to listen. If you're noticing that there's a grandmother who picks the kids up from school every day, make an approach and find out, what is happening for her, what is happening for her family. Again, using the example of grandparent carers, they don't fit in with their same age peers, but they don't fit in at the school gate either. So offering the hand of friendship to people. One of the women who is on the community advisory group for 100 families is now halfway through her social work degree. And if she was here, she would tell you that's because she created a community around herself. She didn't finish high school. She didn't finish year 10. She went and did a bridging course. She's now halfway through, as I say, her social work degree and getting on average 92. So this woman is kicking goals everywhere. But she has surrounded herself with a community who look after her kids, who will shout her a coffee when it's the end of, when it's the end of the pay cycle, who will proofread her assignments for her, who will, she's got the biggest collection of social work texts because so many of us in that project have given her our textbooks. So I think, that's again about us listening to people, understanding their story, and recognizing that what seems like a little thing is a really, really big thing for somebody who is taking a brave step to change their lives, to break the bias and the assumptions that have existed in their own lives. So to never ever underestimate, the gesture of kindness, and what seems like something really small to us is something really big for that person.
And that young woman you were talking about there could have so easily slipped through the gaps at many, many levels. So what a remarkable outcome. Tell me, we just had International Women's Day last week on the 8th of March. What was one of the things you did on that day?
Yeah, so one of the organisations in the electorate of Nedlands is Dress for Success. So they're based in Subiaco, and I knew of their work long before I entered Parliament. So Dress for Success is a not-for-profit organisation that help women who are returning to the workforce. So who've had a break from the workforce for all kinds of reasons. And the Dress for Success bit is that they take donations of new and secondhand work clothes, and they provide women with an outfit for a job interview, and then we'll provide them with enough kind of workwear to get through the first couple of weeks of work. And as part of that, they also do makeup lessons. So we had a collection from our local community of new and unopened makeup, and we're able to take a huge basket full of all kinds of things that they'll be able to use with those women in teaching them, kind of makeup skills and how to present for an interview. They do a whole lot of other work around getting women job ready, interview skills, writing a resume, how to ask someone to be a referee, all of those kinds of things. But that kind of, the feedback that they get from women is that, that being able to present yourself, how you see yourself, is really, really empowering and allows them to step into an interview with a different sense of confidence. So yeah, we're absolutely delighted to be able to support them on International Women's Day.
Again, how rewarding. It's so easy for us to think of politics or being a politician as perhaps a thankless task, but when you describe the sorts of connections that you can make in our community, that's very uplifting. I just do want to thank you so much for your time you've given today. At the Perkins, of course, we are a League of Nations. We have researchers from all over the world, which is so interesting to be part of. And I think all of us will take from you today just that little extra bit of listening and asking questions, and then your imagination can fill in some of the gaps of how we might be able to support each other to grow a better society. So, Katrina, thank you so much for your time today, and all the best with the work that you're doing here in Nedlands.
Thank you so much for having me. I've visited the Perkins a number of times, and very happy for people to reach out and let me know about the work they're doing, and anything that I can do to progress the work that you're doing at Perkins as well.
Thank you very much.